Hey there, this is Salgood Sam, aka Max Douglas, and I'm the creator of a bunch of comics, including my newest, Mind Engine. And this is the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Salgood Sam about his new graphic novel, Mind Engine, and his plans for Toronto Comic Arts Festival 2025. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button, so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Salgood Sam, aka Max Douglas, grew up in Toronto, Ontario, but now resides in Montreal, Quebec. He's been a freelance artist for nearly 3 decades, working mainly in comics, animation, and illustration, with a side order of graphic design, concept art, and mural painting. For the last 5 years, he's been a part-time teacher. He started publishing comics and zines in the late 80s and started making comics professionally in the early 90s. His work has been published notably by Image, IDW, Marvel, and DC, and outside of comics his clients have included the Criterion Collection, Bravo TV, Nokia, Nelvana Studios, and Fox, among many others. His newest project is Mind Engine Ignition Sequence. Mind Engine Ignition Sequence is a personal comic anthology. According to Salgood, the project gets its name from growing up in the 70s, being the son of an artist and a poet mechanic. His personal creative process, all things brain cognition, and more. The comics are described as political and social commentary in nature, addressing a range of issues that he cares about personally. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Salgood Sam about his new graphic novel, Mind Engine, and his plans for Toronto Comic Arts Festival 2025. So, Salgood Sam, aka Max Douglas, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
My pleasure.
I
Thanks
appreciate
for
your
having
time.
me.
Yeah, no, this is great. We haven't chatted. I was looking at my notes. It's been literally years since we've chatted, so it's great to catch up.
Yeah.
But before I get going with all the questions, I would like to know, what are you reading today?
Well, funny you should ask. I have a stack of books in front of me, just like shows that I've been going to the last little while. Probably a lot of people in the business have this experience of like having an embarrassing to read stack, and I'm always getting new ones from shows. But I currently like have a handful that are on the top that I'm interested in getting at somewhere from FBDM recently. I got Be Yourself. Oh, Not Like That, which is a book by Emilia Stirolachuk. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. It's a book about having ADHD or autism. I think both, maybe. And my friend Rick Trembles has a book called Gestulating Gentrification, which is about his experience of getting rent evicted years ago and dealing with just like rising cost of living. He does very interesting counterculture comics. And I was checking out Troy Little and oh, I'm blanking on his wife's name right now, but they
Brenda
started
Hickey.
a publish. That's it. They started a publishing imprint called Pegamoose, and I dropped it by their tent walking up the street. And there was a book they just published called Portrait of the Tame, which is, I've not started reading it yet, but it's really beautiful. It's like top of the list. Kind of makes me think of definitely some Bone vibes, but a little darker. So that's cool. And Elaine M. Will just put out The Last Man on Earth, which I backed, and I got my copy in the mail. So that's on my to read list. And Robin, I always want to say bougie, and I interviewed him once, and Robin said he takes either bougie or boogie, like to dance boogie. So how you like it? He put together a new book that's sort of like his cinema sewer. So this is Sonic Sewer. So it's all his. I don't know if he actually hand wrote it because I know he had a font made eventually, but then he was talking about how he still likes lettering by hand. But I think this one is his font, but it's in the style of like handwritten comics, but like reams and reams of text talking about his favorite bands, and there's comics from all sorts of people in it. So that's a really cool thing. Something that I got a while back and really liked and read it for the Doug Wright Awards as a judge, and then has worked its way back into my to read list because I want to read it again, is James Collier's The Lonesome Shepherd. I'm actually not sure if that was the one we had to read for the Doug Wrights. I know I read one of his books for the Doug Wrights. I know I bought this at Exposine, so I'm not sure if this is the one I got at Exposine or the one I got for the to read for the awards. And then I also have the. Do you know who a Stripburger is?
No, it doesn't ring a bell.
There are interesting Eastern European publishing has does underground comics, and they just put out a pair of. I think it's all wordless comics. These two collections. So it's mostly Eastern European cartoonists doing these surreal magic realism wordless things. And that's just something that's kind of nice to like flip through and check out. A lot of experimental art and some mostly fairly straightforward visual storytelling, but some of them are kind of neat experimental ones. So kind of a mix. Just really beautiful though too. And then it's wordless storytelling, which is something that's always kind of interested me. So there's other stuff too. I kind of when I have a moment, brain cells to spare, and sit down and to look at some stuff. I've got a rather large collection of books now, so I have lots of things to pick through. But those are the top of the pile.
That's great. Yeah, we had Amelia Strilchek on not too long ago talking about her book. So lots of good books there to read and keep you busy. But right now, we're talking
Yep.
about your latest project, Mind Engine Ignition Sequence. What if you talk a
Yep.
bit about it? Maybe describe what was your thought behind it?
The format is a personal anthology series, which is something I've always been drawn to. And you're talking to publishers, you get pushed away from it these days because they're hard to sell. So they're not so interested in it. So I've mostly been self-publishing them. And I did one for a while called Revolver, which had actually really about 6 issues and different iterations. And it's got my one and only award nomination with the first Doug Wright Awards. I got nominated for a Best Emerging for the first small run of Revolver 1. And it's kind of like just a home for what I'm working on at the time. I did a bunch of those. Then I did a graphic novel that got sold to first Comixology / Amazon and then physically published by Dark Horse. And I couldn't keep having Revolver out with the serialized versions of that comic in it. So I had to pull back a bunch of the issues. And now there's just 2 available. It's like Revolver 1, which is like a color reprint of the first thing, and Revolver 0, which is all the stuff I could keep in print, put it into one final book. And I felt like that was like an end to that series. So Mind Engine is sort of a relaunch of the same concept. It's a personal anthology of whatever I'm working on, but renamed in a certain way. It's sort of reflecting like the concept of Revolver was a suggestion from a girlfriend, but partially just because I have wide tastes in what I want to do. And so it was like a revolving door of different aesthetics and stories and genres. Mind Engine is sort of another take on that. Plus also it's just reflecting the exploration of like how people think, how brains work. It's always been an interest of mine, but it's recently become an extra fascination because I've learned about or learned new things about how my brain works. I'm on the spectrum myself. So that's sort of a reflection of that. And the subtitle ignition sequence, basically, I'm not going to number them anymore. I'm just going to give them a playful subtitle that probably will stay in a sequence, like things that happen with an engine as it's booting up and running and stuff. So I think the second issue is going to be called Clutch right now. The first volume that I just put out has a big chunk of the next book of Dream Life, which is a graphic novel I self-published a while back. I think that's probably what I talked to you about last. And then there's a bunch of other things, a wordless story, of course, because I was just talking about wordless stories. That was inspired by the pandemic. There's some weird fantasy stuff. A big aspect of it, I started working on this right around the time where I was flirting with doing digital work, like an all digital workflow, but then found that I don't find that as rewarding. And then even more so now that my day job's in animation, I'm spending all my time doing digital work that way. So I've about part of the way through, I scrapped a bunch of work on Dream Life and went back to doing it all analog. The wordless story I mentioned is the only thing in there that's pure digital. And then there's some mixed media and experimentation. And I guess that's probably a good summary of what's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was reading about it saying that it's described as a political and social commentary in nature. Is that pretty much the sort of the raison d'etre of each of these little vignettes, I guess you could call them, throughout the book?
There's a lot more of that. I definitely decided to when I was really young, I got kicked out of high school. Long story short, a list of career choices, it was either art or activism. And I explored activism a little bit. I worked for Greenpeace in my late teens. and did some stuff with that. And I just found I don't have the constitution or disposition for it. There's too much socializing involved. And then there's all sorts of like complicated politics that you have to deal with, not just like the issues themselves, but within groups. And I didn't find I was able to navigate that and keep my sanity. So I backed away from that and pursued art, but I always felt like I wanted to work the ideas and messages and issues that was concerned with into the work. It's actually what kind of drew me early on. I did work for Marvel. And part of the reason I was attracted to trying to do commercial comics work is I saw stuff like what Alan Moore was doing and thought, well, if those big publishers are open to letting him express his views on different things that way, unaware at the time of what an uphill battle was and all the shenanigans behind the scenes. Suffice to say, it did not go that way. And it's been difficult both to find projects when I wasn't writing my own that kind of reflected things I wanted to say, and then also find, once I was doing my own writing, figuring out how to articulate what I wanted to say. And I've sort of been circling it in wider and wider arcs. Like Dream Life has a lot of social commentary and subtext and stuff in it. It's not very political overtly, but it's about people dealing with real life and stuff they're thinking about. So that comes up. So I sort of come at it very much obliquely on that stuff. But there's some stuff in Mind Engine that is way more directly a commentary on what's going on in the world or things that I care about or I'm personally affected by. So there's been this, as I get older and figure out how to articulate what I'm saying more clearly, I think the politics of my work is becoming a little more bare. And so some of the stories are more like that, especially the little short ones I did as a project. We tried to do an art challenge last May, a year ago, around opposing generative AI or critiquing it and talking about the ethical issues around it. And I gave myself a bunch of prompts and only got about a quarter of the way through before it was festival season. So before festivals came up and things got derailed my attempt. But I got a good chunk of comics out of it. And a bunch of those are in this as like interstitial one-pagers. So that kind of stuff.
I just want to circle back a wee bit. And I've heard this before, especially with people who are dealing with digital creativity, that their eyes go buggy. And I'm a writer. I'm in front of screens all the time. So it's nice to get away from it. And you mentioned going back to analog. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more in depth about your creative process, going the traditional route. Do you do sketch out first and then do inks later? How does that work for you?
It tends to be a little bit tailored to each project. Like I'm working on a memoir series. A big chunk of it is in Mind Engine, but there's also some in Revolver called A Bastard's Tale. It's bastards, plural, not possessive. It's very mixed media. So some of it's just sketches in my sketchbook that I then collage into pages. Some of it's digital drawing. Some of it's more traditional comic pages. There's a page in the current one where I'm reminiscing about going to this house where a woman looks like Dolly Parton and running off into the field with my dog. And that one, as a memory for me, and the caveat here is I don't have like literal pictures in my head, but it's a much more, I don't know, like utopic or like happy fantasy memory. So I went with a more cartoony look and did it all digitally for that page. But in previous pages, it's just like pencil sketches because I'm dealing with something that's a bit more raw, but also less clear as a narrative in my head in terms of my memory. And just even that like issue of the nature of memory is something that I'm playing with. So for that story, the process is literally all over the place and it's kind of trying to capture the nature of my memory of that moment. With something like Dream Life, I have a full, not final because I'm constantly revising it, but full script that I've written for the entire, probably like 300 pages of story. And for that, I'll do traditional thumbnails and then do pencils. And when I was doing the first book, I was really kind of like intentionally doing all the things you should do, including like 6 or 7 passes on the pencils and refining them like crazy. This time around, I'm not doing quite that much. And then I go to blue lines and inks, and eventually there'll be washes. For the Mind Engine stuff, I'm going to just do it black and white line work for now, just to go a little faster because I don't have as much time free. Each project gets a little bit refined to reflect the genre, the feeling I'm looking for, how much kind of development I need to do for each page in terms of thinking it out, or if I want to experiment. Like a lot of times, my initial layout's a very straightforward grid, but I like getting out of the grid and doing something else. So I'll frequently come back to pages at the thumbnail stage and revise them after blocking everything out and thinking, okay, how else could I do this that's more interesting than just storyboarding it? And then occasionally too, like with Dream Life, I wrote the first draft of that script ages ago. And with the chunk that's in the book now, there's a sequence where one of the characters is telling a story that's mostly confabulation about her adventures on the road. And I originally was going to have her a much more involved and complicated story. And I was getting bored, like getting up back to it and doing it now. And I realized, okay, if I'm bored, the readers are bored. Cut, 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 cut. And I just like cut it down to a quick 3 or 4 pages of just her narrating the story. And eventually our friends call her on as being over the top. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Most of it is sort of like you're asking about digital. Most of the time it's in my notebooks and sketchbooks. I've flirted with digital, and I've used digital tools since the early 90s, but mostly as an editing and post-processing tool. And then with my day job, that's all pure digital. So the biggest thing for me has been just like wanting to get away from the screen for a bit. It's not even so much my eyes. I don't find drawing on glass very joyful. That's a big part of it, is the tactile sensation and the happy accidents. A lot of people get anxiety about drawing and inking on paper. I love the accidents. And the thing that always annoyed me about digital is you have to contrive them. You have to think like, well, it would look better here as an accidental splotch, but it's not splotching because it's a digital brush. So I have to go invent a splotch. It's definitely faster for me on paper and more pleasant. Whereas digital just invites you to go crazy and control everything.
We're also talking because you're going to be exhibiting at the Toronto Comic Arts Festival. I wanted to ask you, what are you looking forward to most at that event?
Well, I'm going to be tabling solo, so mostly I'm going to just try to keep my endurance up and selling books. I have a new book after like 5 years of not having a lot of time to make books. So that's kind of my main reason for doing it. I didn't necessarily think I was getting a spot, so I only found out a couple weeks ago. And so that's exciting. I'm eager to get it out to people and get feedback on it and stuff. I created an email for the book, and there's a note at the back that I would love letters for a letters page in the future. If we want to write them on paper, you could do that. I don't have a PO box, but they could scan it and email it to me, I guess. It's a little silly. I'll probably be seeing friends and like hanging out too. And it's funny because they've moved it from Mother's Day, but Monday's my mother's birthday. I'll be also probably seeing her on Sunday. She's a regular at the show. She's in the business, not in comics, she's in animation, but she's in the arts as well and goes a lot. And I'll probably be seeing her and then going to spend some time with her on Monday as well.
So for people who can't make it to TCAF, although we all want them to, where should people go online to find out more about you and hopefully get your book?
I have a website, a domain, salgoodsam.com. That's probably the first easiest place to look. For Mind Engine, there's a link there to get the digital version. I have not yet worked out how to distribute or maybe do a print-on-demand version for physical copies. I'm going to, but one of the choices I made with this project is to no longer engage with using what used to be CreateSpace, which I liked, is now Kindle Direct, and Amazon, which I don't like so much. I have some older books with it that I'm still getting supply from them, but I think I want to disengage from them completely eventually. And I didn't want to put this book up there. So I've got to figure out how to get it to shops and maybe get a print-on-demand solution. There's a couple of publishers in Canada. I know you were talking, I was listening to one of your podcasts this week, and you were talking to someone who works with Studio Comics that they look good. I might go approach them about when I'm in Toronto, see if they're interested. It'll be up somewhere. I guess start with my website, and if you want to get the digital one, it's available there via Gumroad. And eventually the print will be out as well. Or, go to the festivals. I'll be there with the copies. And those are a first 100 copy limited print run that I did with a local printer here in Montreal.
That's great. Well, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
And you always ask that, and I was thinking about it, and I'm still stumped because now my brain's thinking about all the things we just talked about. But I think one of the things that I will bring up, because I mentioned it and we were talking about it, is, and you've asked people in the past, it was one of your other questions that you were doing was like, how do you feel about the digital stuff? And I always like put out there in people's heads that like the issue isn't so much the tools. I've always been a fan of tech and digital tools. I went to computer camp in the 80s, but I also really like, as I mentioned, working with analog for my art. And for me, that's more of a tactile pleasure thing. And I don't oppose the idea of new tech coming in and changing the way we do things. My issue is always and has continues to be the way it's being used by people. And that ranges from everything from the way it's trained, which has essentially been a massive act of labor theft by scooping up all of our collective works online under the false pretense that it's somehow public domain, which is not. It's not how copyright works. And using it to train a machine under kind of a what I feel is a bad faith use of fair use. I know that Cory Doctorow disagrees with me on that because we've talked about that, but not that we're friends or anything, but we had a back and forth. But I do think we're of the same mind in that it is really being used not to just create some great tool for science or culture, but to create a for-profit image generation platform, which is what we're seeing happening. And that's then going into competition with the people, the living artists whose work it was trained on. And that's my biggest ethical problem on the labor front. I think we need some kind of large scale labor movement to address some of that. There's also ecological issues, the way it's run. A lot of these companies were making all sorts of claims about zero carbon efforts, and they've backed away from all that, restarting nuclear plants, all sorts of crazy stuff to try to run these huge data centers with no like real clear shown profits. Follow a guy named Ed Zitron, and he's really goes after them, scorched earth, calling out the fact that all of this stuff is often like kind of a scam in terms of spinning it up to raise stock values and generate venture capital investment, but isn't really showing widespread commercial adoption in a way that works. And then when companies get talked into firing off a lot of people, putting them out of work, trying to replace it with AI, they find it can't actually do very specific task-oriented stuff very well, and they need to hire people back on. But of course, are they hiring them back at appropriate pay levels? Yeah, they're always looking to cut their corners. So I feel like we need more people to recognize that this isn't about like being a caveman and rejecting technology, but about doing what's right both for the planet and for the humans who live on it, and respecting people's kind of right to survive. And if we're going to have a capitalist system, then a right to earn a living and thrive in that system. Or we can have a conversation and question the need for a continued absolutist capital system, maybe, because I'm definitely a leftist and would be all for having that questioned.
Thanks to Salgood Sam for the chat. You can discover more about Salgood Sam online at salgoodsam.com and on Instagram at instagram.com/salgoodsam. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations about creators' insight on making comic books and graphic novels. I also encourage you to subscribe via the website so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media sites, and you can send any and all feedback to John at truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2025.